Hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to the Cisco Research Summit on software supply chain security. Today we're going to talk about the important topic of how software supply chain is influencing security of different software platforms and services. We're at Cisco Research. We have a privileged and we're honored to have a privileged list of speakers. We'll start with Professor Elisa Bertino, Professor at Purdue University, Professor Laurie Williams, North Carolina State University, Professor Brandon Saltaformaggio from Georgia Tech, Professor Santiago Torres-Arias, Purdue University, and myself, Ashish Kundu from Cisco Research. The agenda of the summit is as follows. So we have Dr. Ramana Kampela, head of Cisco Research. He's going to kick off the summit, and then we'll start the presentations by our honored speakers. Elisa Bertino from Purdue is going to talk about the persistent problem of software insecurity. After that, Laurie Williams from North Carolina State University is going to talk about challenges in software supply chain security. That will be followed by Brandon from Georgia Tech talking about supply chain cyber forensics, investigating software supply chain attacks, targeting package managers and cloud backends. Santiago from Purdue is going to talk on understanding and mitigating software supply chain security threats. These professors, we are really honored to have them here, as well as we have been collaborating with them in our Cisco Research and academic collaboration process, and then we'll follow that up with a talk on GraphBomb, the internal Cisco Research project we are working on how an advanced graph-based software supply chain security platform is going to address some of the concerns that are not being addressed in today. And then towards the end, we'll have a panel for roundtable of questions and discussions. That will conclude the summit. So let me invite our head of Cisco Research and director, Dr. Ramana Kampela, to kick off the summit, please.
Thank you, Ashish, and welcome to all the distinguished speakers. So pleased to have you all come in and talk about some of your research in the space. And we have also been incredibly lucky to collaborate with all of you and be a small part of your research, fund you, have your students come and visit, all that good stuff. And this topic is actually very, very near and dear to Cisco. Software is all around, and any vulnerability in the supply chain can have very serious potential for havoc all around the world. Just we witnessed some high profile incidents around things like Log4j and SolarWinds and so on and so forth. So this topic is actually extremely interesting to Cisco. And Ashish and our team has been leading some of this work around GraphBomb, which he'll talk about a little bit. But I think this problem is huge, and multiple people from multiple universities need to all come together and really take a holistic look at how we can address these challenges. So it's actually really incredible to have this panel to come in and share your thoughts on how we can solve and address these challenges. So welcome, and I'm really looking forward to some amazing talks in this area. And hopefully some nice discussion at the end, and maybe some thoughts on really how to holistically address this going forward. And I'm really excited to listen to all your talks, and hopefully our audience, both within Cisco and outside, will find these extremely interesting and inspiring to some extent for folks to come in and maybe even contribute at some level. A lot of our work that we fund with all of you folks have been all in open source. So if folks out there like really want to contribute and really truly make a difference and make an impact, I think they have the opportunity to do so, either within Cisco by collaborating with our team, or outside Cisco by just participating in the open source efforts and stuff like that. So yeah, really looking forward to a wonderful session today, and thanks Ashish for putting this together, and Carla as well, and Cisco TV for doing all the logistics and AR, all the audio video stuff. So I'm excited, and over to you, Ashish, to kick it off.
Thank you so much, Ramana, for your direction and also for all the support, as well as for this work and our collaboration with all the PIs here and with academia, as well as for kicking off the summit. And I must thank Carla as well for her hard work and so much of taking care of all the work in getting this organized. Really appreciate Carla and her team, as well as the Cisco TV team. And we must also thank our senior leadership with Vijay and others for supporting this kind of work at Cisco Research. Really. So with that, let me invite Professor Elisa Bertino from Purdue University to deliver a talk on the persistent problem of software insecurity. Professor Elisa Bertino is world-renowned researcher in security and privacy for last maybe 4 decades or more, and it has been a privilege to work with him. My apologies, for work with her for several years, and also collaborate here from Cisco Research on this project as well, and related projects. Professor Bertino is an SCM fellow, an IEEE fellow, and has several awards to her for her work, and her recent work on LTE security protocol analysis have been at the Hall of Fame and have appeared in top venues. Those are some of the latest work. But without any further ado, it's my privilege to invite Professor Elisa Bertino from Purdue University. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ashish, for the very kind introduction. I'm very pleased to be here to share my perspective on the problem of software supply chain. Let me share my screen to start. So I'm going to cover this problem of software from 2 different perspectives. The first one is to really talk a little bit about the problem that software is still unsecure and has a lot of vulnerabilities. Second, I'll share my idea about the specific problem of supply chain. Now, the reason why I got interested in software security was when I started doing work on cellular networks, where I realized that those cellular network protocols are very complicated. They have a mistake in their design, but also in their implementation. And then along those lines, and then I realized that talking to my colleagues in networks, that software is increasingly playing a critical role in networks. And there are reasons for that. Of course, you need more flexibility, interoperability, use different network technologies and so forth. But I also had been working on the security of mobile application. And to my surprise, I found that those, even though recently developed, still are highly insecure. So I want to share you a little bit of what we found as based on our work. So we started with looking at mobile applications. Already, we did a large analysis of more than 13,000 applications starting in 2019. This was a simple analysis, just checking if these mobile applications, they securely do login and password. Namely, we wanted to check whether they, on the client side, running on the mobile phone, they securely manage certificates. And typically when a client receives a certificate, it has to do a number of checks. For example, whether the certificate is signed by a valid certification authority, has to check whether the certificate is self-signed, has to check whether the certificate has expired, or whether the host name on the certificate is the same with which the application is trying to connect. And to our surprise, we found that basically of those almost more than 13,000 applications, more than 3,000 had one or more vulnerability in their verification, which is surprising because we were not expecting that this would be the case. Now notice that we didn't do this analysis by hand. We built a tool led by my colleague Sichi Ma to automatically scan the software and check the code doing the certificate management on the client. So as you can see, it is possible to come up with a tool which automatically will detect those type of vulnerabilities. Then we did another analysis of OTP application. Those are the one-time password. And also here, we found a lot of violation. For example, the values were not really pseudo-random value. They were of shorter length. They would allow the value to be used more than once, and so forth. And again, we automatically analyzed those applications, and we found a large number of them not verifying these guidelines. Now, we were wondering, okay, perhaps mobile applications are known to be developed in a hurry. They want to go quickly to the market. And so that could be a reason. They're quite novel relative to other applications. And then, of course, we wondered, what about open source software? Because there is this notion that open source software should not have bugs. But unfortunately, as Raman already mentioned, in the case discussing the example of the Log4j, open source software has a lot of vulnerabilities and bugs. We did again some analysis of several large open source systems, which are very well known. They've been around for a long time. And we found many memory management bugs. Now, those were really bugs, and mainly had to do with the memory, customized memory management in those applications. So basically, the idea that when software is publicly available is in general is better because a lot of people look to it is clearly not true. But unfortunately, a lot of this software is used in many different application companies and so forth. And today, open source software is an important supply chain avenue from where you get the software. And of course, then I even said, what about SQL injection? Because this type of vulnerabilities has been around for more than 20 years. And I was even wondering, should I teach this to my students? Probably they know what this is. And to my surprise, actually, this number of vulnerabilities is still very high. And a lot of them are being reported. From a point of view, this is positive, if you wish, because it means that at least companies are more aware of this vulnerability. And when they are found, that they report. But you wonder why the code doesn't get fixed, why they're still there. Okay. And so chances are that you have a supplier that the code will have these bugs, and and that is going to be a problem. Okay. And actually, it's very interesting to look at the recent CWE, this is by Matter Corporation, about the most 25 dangerous vulnerabilities. And as you can see, many of them deal with the lack of input validation, SQL injection. So those are really very well-known vulnerabilities that have been around forever. I want to mention that one question I have is the following. We have tools that can help with finding them. Why those tools are not applied? And actually, also today we have a novel project like a Copilot, which which can automatically generate code. So now you have another source of supply of code. Code that can come from open source, can be generated by AI tools and projects, and they are provided by vendors that a company may use to get the software. So the question, will AI be better and create a generated software which does not have vulnerabilities? So there have been an interesting evaluation done in 2022, where they looked at the Copilot, and they saw that basically this code generated had a lot of vulnerabilities, and had basically all the vulnerabilities listed in the high risk CWE, which I have mentioned before by Matter, and of course has a lot of SQL injection. So here you see an example of code where the username and password are obtained as input from the user, perhaps through some interface form, but the code doesn't do any check. And that's shown that you have all other bugs that are really well known. So, and now you wonder, why does Copilot generate this buggy and vulnerable code? Well, of course, it is obvious. It is trained on open source software, software that is found in GitHub. And those software have a lot of bugs. We even found issues in some of this software, like hard encoded password and so forth. But since this type of techniques, the use of, let's say, tools like Copilot and perhaps ChatGPT will increasingly be used to generate code, I feel confident that the research community will come up with solutions to teach these systems to generate the code which is secure. But at the moment, this is going to be another interesting problem. How do we make sure that this code is really correct? I mean, there are possibilities, but one question, for example, that comes to mind is the following. So a lot of research, for example, is focused on finding SQL injection, and there are tools that automatically find those bugs, even automatically fix the bugs. They fix the code. And also in, many researchers have come up with tools which can automatically scan, all applications. So you don't need to find the bugs manually. But the question is, why still the software is not fixed? And this opens an important problem, which is the problem of patching. Patching is always advocated as an important security practice that everyone should apply. But in reality, patching is very complicated to do because you have to do regression testing. Patching can introduce additional vulnerability, unfortunately. So, for example, one tool which was developed by some researchers not only generated the correct code with the patches to fix the SQL injection, but also then fuzzed the code to make sure that the patch didn't break the code. So the problem of patching by itself is very important, and this will be increasingly important given this avenue that we have forgetting code. Again, notice that we have tools doing research that can take care of finding those vulnerabilities. So why is software still unsecure? What should we be doing? So first of all, when coming to software, we need basically to consider that it's not that you can use a single technique to find bugs and vulnerabilities, because it's important to mention that different category of vulnerabilities, they need specialized detection techniques. So, for example, you can use a fuzzing to find typically low-level vulnerabilities like memory vulnerabilities. But there are other type of vulnerabilities like misuse of crypto API, where you really need to use specialized techniques that locate the code and are customized to really detect those misuses. You have SQL injection, again, and logical vulnerabilities. Those are particularly difficult to find. Those are mistakes even in the design of the software, which basically requires that we need to analyze not only the code, but also the specification. So you need to check the specification and make sure that the design is correct, and then also verify the implementation. And again, using different tools for different categories of vulnerabilities. Now, keep in mind that based on our analysis, depending on the application and the code, you may have specialized errors. So we are currently looking at network projects to look at specific types of errors, mistakes that is present in this type of code. But in general, communication protocols like the one that we have analyzed in LTE and 5G, those are complex protocols which are multi-step, and the code is based on event very often, so may have its vulnerabilities. Of course, then we have the problem of supply chain. And again, remember that in theory, if you get a piece of code, let's generated from AI, you still have the problem to verify that this code is correct, unfortunately. So you can say, yes, I know the origin of this code, but this doesn't guarantee me completely that the code is correct. Also because when code is combined with other code and or used for different application, may not work as intended. So that is also a non-trivial problem. Now, we have this problem of unsecure software supply chain, and this became very prominent when we had the SolarWinds attack. In this case, the cyber threat actor infiltrated the software vendor network and injected some malicious code inside of a patch that the vendor then provided to all his customers. Now, our first question was that everyone was wondering is how would the attacker got inside of this system? Because keep in mind that your suppliers are supposed to have a very good security practices, but in this case, the reason from what we have found from documentations on internet and white paper was that a summer intern had hard-coded a password to the update server used by the company to manage the patches, the generation and delivery, the generation of the patches, hard-coded in some software which was put in some GitHub server, which was available. So which means that the attacker had to go there. It seems they got the password and got inside of the system. Now, the SolarWinds attack is particularly complicated. And when you read the details of this attack, you cannot believe in a way. The attackers were incredibly skilled. What they did, basically, they were monitoring all processes. Once they got into the server managing the patches and generating those patches, they would monitor all the process, and whenever they would see that a process would start to build the code, they would intercept this code and replace automatically the injected dispatch inside of this code. And so this means that even if the code is signed after the compilation, signature doesn't help because the code has already been compromised. And the attack is particularly sophisticated because it shows that the attackers were incredibly skillful into even making sure that there were no compilation errors, because if there had been a compilation error, then engineers would have noticed that something was wrong. So there are detailed technical description of this attack. In case you are interested, I have a good report that I found which provides a lot of details. But so let's consider this type of attack. So what can we do? In general, the problem of supply chain, of course, relies on making sure about the source of your code. And as I mentioned before, we have today 3 at least different sources: software provider, open source software, and soon, already today, AI tools which will generate the code. Now, probably this AI tool cannot generate an entire software system, but they can generate portions of it. So with my students, we have analyzed in details how one could protect against an attack like SolarWinds. Now, keep in mind that we have 2 parties here. We have the software provider, but also the victim. That means that the software provider has to do his duty, and there are a lot of techniques like controlling memory accesses to other process region, creation of encrypted files, creation of intermediate files, look at anomalies using machine learning based approach, and trusted execution environment. So this means one will need to look at the steps done by the attacker to basically intercept the compilation process and see how one can protect this entire process, preventing the attack to be able to, again, intercept this process, looking at other processes and so forth. So it may require combining a lot of different security techniques. But also the victim can do something. So we also analyzed what could the victim do. And the victim also can do a lot of things. For example, they can check if this code, which has been patched, now has a different behavior. Typically, what happened with this SolarWinds attack, the problem was that basically the attackers were collecting a lot of data. So that should have raised an alarm. Is that normal that this software collects a lot of data? So if one can profile the software before and after the patch, this could give a very interesting idea, an indication that the patched software has an unusual behavior, and this may then lead to checking the software, isolating the process, and so forth. And again, we analyzed it and we saw that one could apply both a machine learning approach, but also non-machine learning approaches. For example, one has to evaluate whether running processes and to check whether they disable the services and so forth. So, and one interesting idea, which I think could be very promising in general, is to have a behavioral profile of the software. Because in essence, a lot of attacks, typically they try to get data out of the system. And in general, one can say, my software, given a certain input, should do these actions. So, for example, you may check if the profile as that the software copies data to some other file, and if the profile doesn't have such an action, then at runtime you can monitor whether the behavior is different from the one in the profile, because typically this means that the software has been compromised. And of course, there are a lot of interesting technical issues, like for example, recognizing which library you use in your code, the version of those libraries, and so forth. But I'll stop here so we can, have the next speaker talking. Okay.
So
Thank you.
No, thank you, Professor Bertino, for a great talk on the software supply chain security, especially the persistent insecurity of software. Okay, I think we'll have a roundtable at the end for the question. I have a quick question as we have Laurie once she gets ready, but that for the data leakage problem that you mentioned, Professor Bertino, for or in case of software supply chain, the dependencies in a given software package are going to play a role, as you mentioned. Can we say how if a dependency is leaking, is helping data leakage, are there, do you think that existing technologies or tools that are there are able to address that problem, or do you think more research needs to be carried out?
Yeah, in a way, what you have to do is very simple, Ashish, because basically I look at a lot of data breaches attack, and they inevitably have to take this data somewhere in order to steal the data, okay? So typically you see that this data is moved to some other server, or for example, you may say this application is not intended to copy this data, okay? And now you see that the application is opening a file and copying this data. But this means you must have a kind of a behavioral profile of the code and say, what is the code supposed to do with this data? Printing, copying, sending over email, giving to other application. That may not be very precise, but already will give you very good idea whether there is something anomalous there.
Okay. Thank you. And I think that is your proposal of using machine learning can be quite useful.
Exactly. So yeah, right. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So I think we'll now move to Professor Laurie Williams from NCSU. Laurie is a distinguished university professor at NCSU. She is a co-director of the NCSU Science of Security Tablet. She is an NSF Career Award winner, an SCM Distinguished Scientist, and an IEEE Fellow. Laurie is one of the one of the researchers that we are working with on software supply chain security, and she is one of the leading researchers around the world who has taken software supply chain security problem in a holistic manner, has been looking at how different packages are vulnerable, how use of the OpenSSF scorecards, how they are appropriate, or they are useful or not useful that much, or even using machine learning for that purpose. And it has been an honor to collaborate with Laurie as well. And thank you so much for your time and giving a talk here. Over to you, Laurie.
Great, wonderful. Thank you so much for that introduction, Ashish, and I appreciate the partnership that we have. I assume you can see my slides. Let me know if you can't.
Yes,
so
we can see your slides.
Great. And so I'll be talking, I have Cisco on the left side, so I'll be talking about a Cisco funded project first, and then on the right, I have an S3C2, which is a center that we have at NC State, headed out of NC State. That's an NSF center on supply chain security. Okay, so again, talk about a Cisco funded project, and then the second part, which is an S3C2 project, is some information that I'll share from some supply chain summits, similar to this one, but on a larger scale, that we've run as part of the center. The Cisco funded project, and we had a couple, but with the short bit of time, I'm going to highlight one of them. We had a project where we wanted to assist practitioners and researchers in making informed decisions on which security practices to adopt through the development of models between software security practice scores and software vulnerability counts. And so this is to say, like, just examining the relationship of, if we do better software security practices, do we have a more secure product? That's what people want to know as they, increase their workload on instituting these supply chain or security practices. So there is, I'm not sure if everyone knows, so OpenSSF, an industry-wide foundation, has something called a scorecard. And what they do with the scorecard is, in an automated fashion, run a number of metrics across the whole ecosystem. And I'll show you on the next slide an example of what a scorecard looks like. And you know, these are the metrics that are in the scorecard, and for your own project or a component or dependency you're interested in bringing into your product, you can go to the scorecard and find out, you know, do they have dangerous workflows? Do they use a dependency update tool? Do they fuzz their code? Do they have a license? So all of the practices on this screen here you can get for a dependency that you're considering. This is what a scorecard looks like. And so this is an example of, like, you know, and it's on a 1 to 10 scale. So a normalized report for an organization, like 10 out of 10 on the right side, if you can see it, because they don't have binary artifacts. 0 out of 10 because they don't have branch protection enabled. So it's kind of a report that you would look at. And so what we were trying to look at is, if you do these, if you have a perfect score, do you have less security vulnerabilities? So 2 research questions: which scorecard security practices are most important to understand the relationship between security practices and vulnerability counts and regression models? And then the second question is, do packages with the higher aggregate score, so when you add all of those together, have fewer vulnerabilities? So we used large-scale data. So we had on 15 of the security practices in OpenSSF. We looked at 800,000 NPM packages and almost 200,000 PyPy packages. You know, the challenge that we have, and you'll see this challenge came out at the end, that, you know, in theory, if you look at the Sneak vulnerability database and the OSV vulnerability database, which are enhancements, you know, like it can be considered enhancements for the national vulnerability database. Many products don't have any externally reported vulnerabilities. And so it's very hard to demonstrate a correlation when only a small segment of the packages have reported vulnerabilities, like, you know, only 589 packages out of 200,000 PyPy packages, or 1,800 NPM packages out of 800,000. And we all know that it's not that the rest of the products are perfectly secure, if you will. It's just that they don't have externally reported vulnerabilities, which causes a challenge in, you know, in machine learning algorithms. So, I mean, this is a flow chart of what we did. You know, so we gathered data on the scorecard scores for each practice, brought in the vulnerability databases, created regression models in order to answer our research questions. Here's just high-level view again of the practices that show up in OpenSSF. And then we developed our machine learning algorithms and to identify what are the most important practices. So if you want to improve your security, what's the most important practices to adopt? We use 3 different machine learning algorithms. And what we have here are the practices that showed up as to be the most important. And we had as our outcome measure vulnerabilities. And so, like, if you look at on the right side, the most important features, so having a security policy shows up in all 3 of the models. Independency shows up in all 3 of the models. Code review shows up in 2 of the models. So practices are emerging as being the most important for improving security. And so, you know, this is really just a reminder. So code review, maintained, which I didn't call out on the last slide, is an important one. So determining whether the project is actively maintained, meaning there are updates, there are commits, there are issues. Organizations should shy away from bringing in a dependency that hasn't been updated in a while. So these were the 4, if we were to say, based upon our machine learning models, what are the practices that would be best for organizations to adopt to be more secure, if you will. Here's the 4. And then we compare with, there was a Sonatype report on supply chain security, which everyone references. They did a similar type of analysis with scorecard. They did it on the Maven ecosystem, where we did it on NPM and PyPy. And the overlap was code review and branch protection were 2 practices that their results advocated as well. The next thing we did was we looked at the aggregated score. So I mentioned that For each practice, there's a normalized 0 to 10 score for each practice, and then they aggregate it all up into one score for the package. And so our hypothesis was that packages with higher security scores have better security practices and contain fewer externally reported vulnerabilities than packages with lower scores. That was our hypothesis going into the study, which makes sense. The more you do to get your vulnerabilities out, in theory, the more secure you are. However, that's not how it turned out. So what we found was a positive relationship between the aggregate security score and vulnerability count, which kind of sounds like the more you do to make your product more secure, the more vulnerabilities you have, and the less secure you are. However, if you think about it differently, it's the more you look for vulnerabilities, the more vulnerabilities that you find. So that's really what turned out. So, that just shows that vulnerability count really can't be the metric that we use to determine whether practices work, quote unquote, if you will. So to summarize that study, we found 4 practices that have the biggest relationship between institute the practice, have better security, and our security outcome study, had a problem with the metrics that we used. And it showed that, using the practices increases your vulnerability count. And one other thing that we noticed was many ecosystems, whole ecosystems, have certain practices that nobody does. And so, that's something that the ecosystem and the metrics and the scripts that find the scores need to deal with. And also the other thing is, because vulnerability count didn't work out, now we're looking at what's another metric of more secure. And that's the eternal question is, what's a good metric for security? And so what we're working on now is mean time to update and mean time to remediate metrics. So mean time to update, meaning how often do people update their dependencies, all of them. Mean time to remediate is how long does it take them to update the dependencies with vulnerabilities specifically. And then we'll examine a relationship between, having good security practices and the ability to update in a timely manner. And we'll see how the study works with that. All right, next study is software supply chain challenges from industry and government summits. And so we have run already 6 summits with companies, and we 3 a year between 2021 and 2023. We have another one coming up in a couple of months. What we do in these summits are bring companies together and talk about the challenges of software supply chain. There is a Chatham House rules, and these are companies, big and small, companies you have totally heard of. I'll break Chatham House rules where we can't identify the companies who participate a little bit by saying that Cisco and Ashish have participated twice, and we have another one coming up. And so companies as big and, forward-thinking as Cisco are participating. And so far we've had 70, I call it company agency appearances. If a person comes twice, then, that's 2 appearances, same with the company. But we have a lot of data points of really just thinking, talking about what are the challenges. One sentiment that we keep hearing is the executive order is forcing industry to adopt security practices that should have been adopted 20 years ago. We actually want to be more secure, not just comply. I would say that's really the thought process of everyone who's participated in the summit. They want to come together for good so that security of products can be enhanced, not just to comply with the executive order. So what I'm going to talk about are the top 7 challenges that came out of these summits. And these are not solutions, they are challenges. And so we'll go through each of these 7 in the next few slides. The first challenge is dealing with the executive order. And probably everyone has heard that back in May 2021, There was an executive order on improving the nation's cybersecurity. One of the sections was on enhancing the security of the software supply chain. So it's on everyone's mind, complying with this executive order. For each of the 7, I'll give a little intro and then the highlights of the discussion. So one of the highlights is, people are saying that the executive order is helping to get upper management attention on, the need to develop secure products. And that there is a cultural change necessary to comply. Developers and organizations are much more used to having freedom in their processes. Compliance and the need to comply has, taken away some of the freedom. So it does require a cultural change. Currently, a lot of concern about how do we even comply anyway. There's not a lot of specificity in what the government wants. And then also concern for compliance by smaller companies. Will they be able to sell to the US government? You can't sell to the US government unless you comply. What will happen to smaller companies, nonprofits, and open source projects if they're not able to comply? Companies have to provide self-attestation, and which means that they have to say whether they use good software security products or processes, and document that they do or not. And that may be difficult, particularly for smaller companies, for everyone, really. Next challenge is leveraging the software bill of materials and VEX for security. So software bill of materials being a statement of all of the components, all of the things that make up your product, software bill of materials. And VEX is a statement that is being used to say, okay, here's the software bill of materials for my product. Some of the components, some of my dependencies have vulnerabilities, but it's okay because I don't use the part of that dependency that has a vulnerability. So, and therefore I don't need to fix it. And so if you want to be able to say in a machine readable fashion, we don't use that part that's vulnerable, then you can put a VEX addition, a JSON type of statement to say, we don't use that. And so these are, again, compliance checkboxes, but organizations really want to be able to use the software bill of materials with this VEX addendum to improve security, not just for compliance purposes. So some highlights. The software bill of materials, in theory, can help with, if there's a vulnerability, am I affected? What's affected? And Log4j showed that people who had a software bill of materials could respond more quickly. But actually, as we talk to people within the summits, the software bill of materials consumption, people actually using it for good, is quite low. People are producing them as much as they can, but not really using the information that much. Just an understanding that producing the software bill of materials sounds easy. There's tools to do it, but actually it's harder than expected. Software bill of materials can be very big. They can be gigabytes. They can be terabytes, much bigger than people would have thought. A view that sunlight is the best disinfectant. So if you have to disclose all of the things in your product through a software bill of materials, you might take out the things that you're embarrassed about using, which is a good thing. Concerned about releasing software bill of materials to the public. So, are you now releasing information to attackers that they can use? Or are you releasing proprietary information? But overall feeling that transparency is probably better. VEX, that I mentioned, which is a statement that to say, we don't use this, is manual. And so the value is a little bit, uncertain, because it's kind of a statement like, I promise I don't use that part. It's very manual. Currently, software bill of materials is mainly viewed as a compliance checkbox. Next is using trustworthy dependencies, so making good choices. Everyone's probably seen this comic before, but we want to identify things that are not that little block that can, like a dependency that's that little block that can blow out your whole product if it has a problem. So making good choices. And an acknowledgement among the summit companies, there's no easy metrics to help people choose a good dependency. Some that I consider are like known vulnerabilities, number of dependencies, whether it's backed by a company, popularity, Some people are using those OpenSSF scorecard metrics I told you about, but in many cases, not so much. People in general target more widely used packages, but more widely used packages might be even a bigger target for attackers who are trying to inject vulnerabilities into the ecosystem. So you have to watch that. Some companies have a lightweight process and also an acknowledgement that you need to contribute back to the open source community, not just complain about what's there. Updating vulnerable dependencies. So reports these days, SCA tools or software composition analysis tools will tell organizations about the vulnerabilities in their dependencies. This is drinking water out of a fire hose. Usually these tools give you so much information. It's intractable and people don't know what to do with them. So, what should be done about that? You could have new vulnerabilities daily from these SCA tools. And transitive dependencies, so dependencies of dependencies, or 3 or 5 or 7 levels deep of transitive dependencies cause the dependency graph to have lots of vulnerabilities and it's ever changing. Some tools like Dependabot will generate a pull request, but most organizations don't do these automated pull requests. They want humans to intervene. So, it's still considered how to manage this onslaught of vulnerable dependencies is really not a solved issue. Detecting malicious commits. So attackers are now injecting new malicious components into the ecosystem. So how do we detect those and stop them? And so, some acknowledgement that it's hard to distinguish a malicious commit from an unintentional mistake. So it's hard to train machine learning models and whatnot to find them. Two-person review can help maybe spot that there's a malicious commit. Using signed commits, strong authentication can help. But in general, there is really just a search, and we're doing that in our own work, and we'd love to work with Cisco more about using machine learning to identify malicious commits. 6.1 is secure build and deploy. Elisa mentioned SolarWinds. So that's an attack on the build infrastructure. And so that's a challenge. What this chart is really saying, when we started the first summit in 2021, that build infrastructure path was like, hair on fire. We don't even know how to stop this. We don't even know what to do. But SALSA has come along and now turned it from we don't even know what to do into we know what to do. Maybe we're not doing yet, but we know what to do. So SALSA out of OpenSSF has provided some practices that can be used to secure the build infrastructure. There's a lot of talk about SALSA and whatnot. And then reproducible builds is one of the ways to secure the build infrastructure in order to identify that someone's in your build infrastructure. And a lot of talk about for legacy applications, reproducible build where you build twice and do a bit by bit comparison is intractable. Other products saying, we're a new product and we can do it and we're already doing it. And then the last challenge is humans in the supply chain. So they're the weak link. There was a 1984 Turing Award talk called Trusting Trust. To what extent should one trust the statement that a program is free of Trojan horses? Perhaps it's more important to trust the people who wrote the software. And so really focus on the people. This is a slide with lots of different people developing software. And if you remember Sesame Street, which of these things is not like the others? They all look like really hardworking developers, but one of them is an attacker. And so how do we figure out which developer out there that's contributing is actually an attacker? And the last bullet here is saying, can we use machine learning to identify the attackers? What does it mean? In a lot of ways, as the other bullets say, developers and tools, how do you identify what is a malicious attacker and what is not? And so I guess the bottom line is all of those challenges, no company, not Cisco, can say, okay, we're going to solve the supply chain problem for us. You can't. It's something that, we're all tied together. No one's an island. We're all on this together, which is great that Cisco's participating in research and in summits as part of the community. And that's it.
Okay, I have a quick question. Laurie, a couple of them, in fact. One of them is mentioned how machine learning can be used for determining attackers from for software supply chain compromise.
Yeah, so I mean, we're doing, so we have like data sets that we're developing of all kinds of metadata and, and features. And we have like code that we download and metadata that we download, and then are able with that data collection to identify like if a component was eventually taken down, and they are labeled as security holding when they're taken down, particularly in the NPM ecosystem. So then we can say, oh, that package was taken down for security holding. And we have the data because we track it over time, and we can go back and look at the packages that were eventually taken down and are looking for patterns within that data that could signal that this had been a problem. And so, we're looking for a whole variety of things in that, like security, like how many maintainers are there? Are there maintainers that have domains that are for sale, and now someone else can come in and scoop it, and then they scoop it, and then they have a malicious commit. We've seen that packages that end up getting taken down don't follow semantic versioning or have lots of commits in one day. So we're really collecting a lot of metrics so that we can identify the packages that eventually turn out to be security holding packages. So that's really the line of research we're on right now, is being able to distinguish, insecure from secure dependencies. And then hopefully those types of things can be put into the ecosystems, and the packages can be taken down sooner and or never be allowed to be input in the first place.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Laurie, for a
Okay.
great talk. Everyone, please feel free to post your questions and comments on the chat box that you have on your WebEx window. Our next speaker is Professor Brendan Saltaformaggio. He's an assistant professor at School of Electrical and Computer Engineering at Georgia Institute of Technology. His research interests are in computer system security, cyber forensics, and the vetting of untrusted software. He is working with Cisco Research for last couple of years on software supply chain security and forensics. He has received best paper award. His work and his lab has received best paper award from SEM CCS 2015, and also a best student paper award in 2014 using security symposium. He was honored with the 2017 SEM SIGSAC doctoral dissertation award, and as well as 2 fellowships, 2016 Symantec Research Labs Graduate Fellowship and the inaugural Emil Stefanov Memorial Fellowship in Computer Science. It is an honor to have been collaborating with Brendan over the last 2 years, and great to have him here as a speaker for our Cisco Research Summit here. Thank you so much, Brendan, for your time. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that introduction. So I'm gonna get right into it. Y'all know who I am, thanks to that. So I direct the Cyber Forensics Innovation Lab, or the Sci-Fi Lab at Georgia Tech. And for over a decade now, we have been pioneering research into next generation cyber forensics. And we take that approach here to the software supply chain. We also develop novel techniques for vetting and investigating software, removing malicious components, that sort of thing. And we package all of this research up into applications in cloud and enterprise system security. And it's important to note that underpinning all of my lab's research is the development of fundamental techniques for binary program analysis and instrumentation. And you're going to be seeing a lot of that here today. We're going to get super hacky in this talk, so just hang in there. I think we'll get through it together. So let's set the stage, right? As we've been talking about, I'm very honored to follow up the previous 2 speakers because they did an outstanding job motivating this problem, sharing their work. In the software supply chain, contributing developers build and publish software components that then everyone can use. And consumer developers then consume those published software components and add new functionality to their own packages, their own SDKs, whatever they're developing, their applications, anything that gets shipped out into product software. So I want everyone to meet Han. Han is a consumer developer, and Han is building his new killer mobile app. But Han can't just build the mobile app. Han's app also has to communicate with first-party web applications that Han is building, and his mobile app is also going to communicate with some third-party web apps like Dropbox and Twitter. And Han just wants to improve the security of the apps that he's developing. This is pretty tricky though, because Han's applications come with a very lengthy supply chain. We already know that the mobile app is going to depend on first-party web applications that Han is building and third-party web applications that are out in the wild. But each of these things also depends on additional software components like packages that come from the registries or web app plugins that come in from plugin marketplaces. And each of these components comes from an army of contributing developers that are all over the world. And even worse, each part of this supply chain is vulnerable to attackers. And so this is where my research has been focusing, because of course, we can't expect Han to handle all of this by himself. Han is just one developer or one company trying to build their applications. We need cyber forensics techniques to track down and prevent attacks in this very complicated supply chain. And that's what my lab has been doing. So the Sci-Fi Lab's mission for a few years now has been developing techniques at each one of these connections in the supply chain to either investigate or prevent attacks that occur. And in the next rest of this talk, I'm going to run through all of these different projects that we've been working on. So first up is a project that we call Skywalker. So interestingly, we got involved in the software supply chain sort of from the end of the supply chain. We were looking at that mobile application that Han is developing. Now, a mobile application is interesting because it is going to inherit vulnerabilities from the first and third-party web applications that it communicates with. And attackers can use these vulnerabilities to attack the mobile application itself, as well as the web apps that they're communicating with. So I told my PhD students and researchers in my lab, I said, let's help Han. Han faces a few critical challenges. First, Han needs to understand what backends does his app communicate with? How can he check if they are secure? If they're insecure, how can Han go about fixing them? And can Han fix these vulnerabilities, right? Are they vulnerabilities in Han's code or someone else's code? This goes to this problem of attributing vulnerable software. And that's where our technique Skywalker came in. Skywalker was published at Usenix Security 2019. And Skywalker is a binary analysis pipeline that identifies and evaluates vulnerabilities on all of the backends that a mobile application communicates with. So the input to Skywalker is an Android application, and Skywalker is going to use a combination of binary analysis with to identify backends that the mobile application is communicating with, and then service discovery and fingerprinting to identify vulnerabilities on those backends. And then it's going to output to the developer, in this case Han, all of the web applications that his app uses, their ownership, any zero-day or end-day vulnerabilities that it found. And we were super excited. Skywalker actually got a lot of attention. It was a finalist for the Seesaw Applied Research Competition, which is a global competition for applied research techniques like Skywalker. And we were also invited by Google's Android security operations team to give a tech talk. So here's some of our findings. We scanned the top 5,000 applications in the Google Play Store back in 2018 and found that over 50% of them come with 10 or more backends. And that's 10 or more supply chains that can all be bringing vulnerabilities that will affect Han's application. We then scanned those backends for vulnerabilities and found over 1,600 vulnerability instances. and 600 of those were 0-day vulnerabilities. So these were not known until Skywalker revealed them. And we also found over 900 end-day vulnerabilities. But something caught our attention. Over 1,000 of the backends that were vulnerable were third-party backends. So these were used by multiple applications, and you would expect these to be much more secure because they're out there for everyone to be using. So this got us thinking, where did these vulnerabilities come from? And it turns out they're coming from open source packages that are making their way through this supply chain. So we're all familiar with open source packages that come from package managers, right? We all write code. We use PyPy, NPM, Ruby gems, these, registries that are out there where contributing developers will publish a package, and then software developers will pull that package down and integrate it into their app development and into their end product. Unfortunately, this is a very complicated ecosystem, and our research identified several places where attackers can affect and get their malicious packages into this supply chain. First, the contributing developer themselves can be malicious, and you could just have people posting malicious packages. If that's not the case, popular open source packages have also been found to be infected with malware that makes its way through the supply chain. Even worse, we found cases where the registry itself was being exploited to directly publish malware that was getting out into consumer developers. The infrastructure itself, so like the web application that the registry provides, can also be vulnerable. And when consumer developers are downloading and using these packages, they can be victims of any type of attack like typo squatting or false dependence. And so finding all of these places where attackers can get in, my researchers realized that we need a way to identify when these attacks are happening and investigate them in the package managers. So that motivated our work that we called MALOS. MALOS is another program analysis technique that vets supply chain attacks on package managers. And this was published at NDSS in 2021. MALOS studies the underlying security features of the package managers in order to detect malicious packages when they're getting into the ecosystem so that we can stop them before they spread through the supply chain. The input to MALOS is a package and its metadata that would be published up on the registries. And using a combination of metadata analysis, we can flag suspicious packages, for example, like typo squatting candidates. And then we can use binary analysis and heuristic rules to detect malicious code that's made its way into packages. And the output of MALOS are all the identified packages along with authorship attribution so that we can track down where these malicious packages are coming from. So we did a study of over 1 million packages downloaded from PyPy, NPM, and Ruby gems. And these are the most widely used package managers at the time that we published. MALOS identified 339 new malicious packages that were being served by these different registries. 82% of them were taken down by the registries because they could confirm our findings, and we're still working on the others. 3 of those were so widespread, they had over 100,000 downloads each, that they were assigned official CVE numbers. So this is a clear tag that these packages are very malicious and need to be removed from any projects that they're in. We also used MALOS to confirm 312 more reports from the community of malicious packages that have popped up since. So it's nice to kind of get that, confirmation as we go. So what makes this supply chain so attractive for attackers? It turns out it's economic incentives. And this is something we found when we were looking at Han's first-party web applications. So web applications are built on plugins that are sold for anywhere between $2 and $63 on a marketplace system. And this economy can reach over $200 million, our research has found. So there are plenty of instances where attackers are getting their malware into this supply chain and literally selling malware to consumer developers like Han. So the web app supply chain is interesting because web applications are built on top of content management systems that basically handle all of this complex underlying code that builds up a web app. And there's a few different places where malicious plugins can come from. They can come from legitimate marketplaces, which is where attackers just sell their malicious plugins on the marketplace. Attackers could be injecting plugins into a web app using vulnerabilities. Once they're on your web app, they could move laterally and infect other plugins on your web app. Or even more interesting, there are entire pirated marketplaces. These are called nulled marketplaces, where plugins are distributed for free, usually paid plugins that have then been packed with malicious code. In fact, if you Google any popular plugin, web app plugin, and put like free download at the end of the search, the top Google results will often be to these pirate marketplaces. So this is a big problem. So this motivated our technique called YODA, which is a vetting platform to remove malicious plugins from the web app ecosystem. YODA can detect and investigate malicious plugins. The input here is the web app's file system, and YODA is going to peel through that using syntactic and semantic program analysis to identify malicious plugins and then identify their origins using cross-platform analysis so that we can output any detected malicious plugins, where they came from, and how they've been impacting this global economy. This was really nice in that YODA made such a big hit. It was also a finalist for that Seesaw competition a few years after Skywalker was, and we were invited to send a Usenix Login magazine article. So you can read all about YODA either in its paper from Usenix Security or in a login or in that Login magazine article. So we got a data set of over 400,000 websites, and in particular, nightly backups of the file systems for these 400,000 websites dating back to July 2012. And the findings were pretty shocking. YODA found over 47,000 malicious plugin instances across these different websites. And this turned out to be over $41,000 in profits going straight to attackers. 228,000 of those plugins were also found to be pirated and distributed through these nulled marketplaces. So these are explicit losses for benign plugin developers. And even worse, website owners spent over $800,000 on plugins only to find them later infected by attackers. So this got us thinking. If Han is benign and he's just building his web application, this vulnerable supply chain is going to allow attackers to just keep reinfecting Han's web app. So we need a technique that can help Han continuously monitor his web app for infections and remediate whenever an attack is discovered. But this brought us to a strange observation. Even when attacks are discovered, only 10% of those web apps were ever remediated. And even worse, when the web app was remediated, 12% of those were then reinfected in the future. So this shows us that web app developers are not equipped to fix these attacks on their own web servers. If the supply chain is going to remain vulnerable, Han needs an automated way to recover his compromised web app. Like we talked about before, the industry standard is basically to take nightly backups of your website and then leave it up to the website developer to choose if they want to revert to a safe backup or not. But this is really troubling for someone like Han. They're not a security expert. They don't know if this alert is a false positive, or even if they were going to roll back, they don't know how long this attack has been going on for. So Han needs some way to identify the compromise window, how long that his web app has been being attacked. So this was the motivation behind our work called TARDIS. TARDIS is going to identify this compromise window and automatically turn back time on the attack on Han's web app. So TARDIS rolls back the clock on these nightly backups that are already being collected to remove the attacks when they've been identified. The input to TARDIS is that sequence of nightly backups that's already being collected for the web app. And TARDIS is going to use an attack recovery timeline to label the attack events as they unfold on the website. And then the output is going to be that assigned sequence of attack labels and the attack window so that Han can roll back to a safe snapshot. TARDIS was actually so easy to integrate with the existing web server security techniques that it won Georgia Tech's Golden Ticket Award and was nominated for the inaugural $1 billion startup hackathon. So this is really making its way into production right now. We made some interesting findings when we deployed TARDIS on these different websites. Attacks on Joomla and PivotX websites lasted anywhere from 75 to 85 days. This was a pretty lengthy attack window. We didn't expect them to be that long. And even crazier, there was a very long tail distribution here. More than 20% of attacks on WordPress web apps persisted from 300 all the way up to 1,600 days. And so you can see that if you don't get out ahead of these attacks early, they're going to persist and advance in your web applications over time. Even cooler, because TARDIS was able to identify the different stages of the attack, we could correlate these stages across different web apps and watch. We could have a global view of the same attack moving through different websites. So using this, you can report these attacks and get them cleaned up all at the same time. So hopefully, after all of this work, we've secured Han's first-party web apps. But you may be wondering, what about those third-party web apps that Han's app is interacting with? So Han loves using third-party web apps, right? All software developers do. Twitter, Dropbox, it just makes software easier to develop. Well, it turns out malware authors also love using third-party web apps. And so looking at Han's supply chain, we also found attackers abusing these third-party web apps right alongside benign developers like Han. This actually started when we saw this super suspicious tweet on Twitter a while ago. It said target and then an IP address. And we would later figure out that this was posted by an attacker. Attackers would register an identity and post their assets on these public web applications like Twitter. And then later, on a victim machine, a malware sample would pull down this tweet and target this IP address for a denial of service attack. So really stealthy. Now, let's say that Han is he's a good member of the software development community, and he wants to analyze this malware. So Han, puts the malware in a sandbox, but it refuses to run. He resorts to some manual analysis, and that takes a huge amount of time to understand what the malware is doing. But eventually, Han figures out that there could be one of 6 or any combination of 6 ways of abusing these public web applications: fetching messages, uploading files, downloading malware to execute, downloading configuration files, pushing messages back up to the service, or using it as a jump server to get to next stage command and control infrastructure. We call these web app engaged malware. And so let's say Han wants to report this malware to Twitter. So Han goes to Twitter, he clicks on, report, selects malware, and then sends this report over to the service provider. Let's imagine we have a service provider here, call him Elon, for instance. Now, Elon gets this report and has to decide, is this tweet really malicious? But without all of that proof of abuse that Han has figured out, Elon can't ever make that determination. So he's just going to give up and move on. The problems here are that Han needs to convince Elon that this is abuse, provide him with that proof of abuse, and there needs to be a way to effectively collaborate to take down this sort of attack. Well, this motivated our technique, Marcia, that was published at Usenix Security this year. Marcia is able to extract that proof of abuse from a malware sample using concolic analysis and rule-based abuse vector identification. And then it can output a clear proof of abuse that can be provided to web app providers that their platform is being used by malware. So before Marcia, we did a study to see how widespread this problem was, and we found that out of a data set of 10,000 malware samples, almost 9% of them were abusing web applications. So this was a really startling find. 36% of those were actually using Google products, and it took an average of 253 days to detect and remove these malware from the public web applications. After Marcia, we found 430 different web app engaged malware, and we went through the steps of reporting each one and getting it taken down with the proof of abuse that Marcia produced. You can see that we got a 10x speed up on having these things taken down, because now the web app service providers can clearly see how they're being abused, and they can, very rapidly remediate this problem. So in conclusion, the Sci-Fi Lab at Georgia Tech has been looking at all the different connections in the supply chain and using our cyber forensics techniques to remove these attacks and investigate them when they're happening. In the future, we're actually looking at 2 more interesting supply chains where code and data sets come from in AI and ML applications, as well as the supply chain for how blockchain applications get built and distributed. And with that, I'm done. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Brandon, for a great talk on cyber forensics for software supply chain. One of the key challenges in package analysis is, especially some of the packages can be binary packages, Brandon, and those dependencies can be quite tricky in how you analyze them for the malicious updates or anything. Have you looked at them, and what are the research challenges that you have addressed and should be addressed? You're on mute.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, some of these packages have huge dependency chains, and we've even seen cases where the dependency chain can be used for an attack. So we've seen cases where an attacker can actually get their own package put into the dependency chain of benign packages. So you may be using something that's totally benign, but just to install it and use it in your software, it's pulling down malicious packages that are getting incorporated into yours. It takes a careful combination of, program analysis, dependency analysis to tease these things out. So yeah, there's a lot more research to do in that direction. It's a good question.
Now, to add to that point, most of the firmware are kind of binary that are downloaded and deployed. And in that context, sometimes you do not have access to the entire dependency chain there, right? But that's something perhaps we can discuss in our roundtable. Okay, we'll wait for that. But we see that Santiago is ready with his talk, and let me introduce Professor Santiago Torres-Arias. Professor Santiago Torres-Arias is a professor at Purdue University. His research areas are secure systems, applied cryptography, and software supply chain security. His current focus especially is on securing the software development lifecycle. He is a team lead in Toto, a framework to secure the software development lifecycle, as well as Poly password hasher, a password storage mechanism that is incredibly resilient to offline password cracking. He is also a contributor for the update framework, the TUF. And with that, let's have the talk from Santiago. Thank you, Santiago, for your time. It is a great pleasure and honor to actually collaborate with you with Cisco Research on the project related to software supply chain security, and would love to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So I am Santiago. I lead the Trustworthy Software Ecosystems Lab. I chose the word ecosystems rather than systems because I am concerned about not only how we can build computing systems to secure the software supply chain, or rather software in general, but how does it interconnect with everything out there. Today I'll be talking about software supply chain security threats and things that we do in my lab, a lot of it enabled by support from Cisco to protect against these threats. So I'm going to go all the way back, and I'm going to remind everybody that the supply chain or a software supply chain is really a metaphor for something that we do not only in the digital world, but in the physical world as well. Here you see a bottle of Tylenol. This is something that you may have bought when you had a headache. And you understand when you buy a bottle of Tylenol that it comes from a very sort of like intricate series of interconnections and processes and distributions that make some raw material from a supplier a bottle that contains a series of pills with various ingredients on it. Now, we understand software supply chains because we've been doing things for hundreds, or if not thousands of years this way. This is how we essentially engage in trade. Well, supply chains, physical supply chains, also suffer from supply chain security problems. The example that I like to bring up is the Chicago Tylenol murders, where somebody walks into a pharmacy in Chicago, opens a bottle of Tylenol, sneaks a little bit of cyanide on it, and then 7 people died. Things to highlight from this is that this particular compromise was very stealthy. We never found whoever did this. And the other thing is it's high impact. It really did kill 7 people with such a minute action. When we bring this back to the Tylenol bottle, and the reason why this example is very, very useful is because it actually set precedents that change the ways that we do physical products today. A Tylenol bottle has a lot number that allows us to very uniquely track where something came from, which was the run that produced this particular bottle. It has an expiration date that tells you that a product is stale, that you shouldn't be consuming it anymore. It has a tamper-proof seal that prevents it from being tampered in transit. Say, this is exactly the precedent that this gruesome event in Chicago set. And well, all of these mechanisms are something that we are very well equipped as consumers today to gauge the security of a physical product. When we go back into the software world, we have a little bit less of an idea of how this like intricate network of connections works. And as a consequence, we see that there is a lot of actions that hackers have been taken and they continue to take in order to compromise a security product. There's people who hack into version control systems, and there's honestly on the dozen, if not hundreds of different examples that I could bring up today. They happen every year. There's people breaking into build services. We have the famous Xcode Ghost backdoor happen this way. We have, and of course, SolarWinds. We have people breaking into packaging infrastructure. Brendan Stock just earlier highlighted how this is a very sort of profitable, high impact, and relatively stealthy mechanism to compromise a lot of people. And well, this happens on every single ecosystem that you can think of, going from PHP, which is very popular in CMSs, to package repositories, to mirrors of particular platforms, to even closed source distribution platforms. Even questions about compliance arise when you think about software supply chain. There's pieces of software that get released without the required due diligence that end up having very, very high impact. This example of Windows is one that I bring up because hackers, well, not even hackers, sorry, employees of Microsoft were able to break people's computers by just not testing a release that should have been tested, that eventually ended up breaking computing systems. Stepping back for a second and thinking about the original metaphor that we used to reason about how the software is made, we realize that we really don't have a lot of precedents or mechanisms that are well established to secure the software supply chain lifecycle itself. But rather, we have somewhat of a piecemeal hodgepodge of things that we could do, but we don't really apply it or standardize it or even come to them with the knowledge that they're going to work. The things that we do at Trustworthy Software Ecosystems Lab is, sorry, I skipped ahead a little bit, is to try to highlight how these issues that are on the rise appear and understand the intrinsic nature of how they happen, and then develop mechanisms. So we understand and visualize how software is made. By doing this, the slides that you just saw, we published the first software supply chain catalog back in 2018. We donated it to the Linux Foundation. This allowed us to also map essentially the blast radius of software supply chain compromises. With that, then we can identify these threats, and then we can taxonomize and develop an understanding of why do they even happen. This, for example, is a paper from 2016 on using security, where we realized that the signing mechanisms of Git itself weren't strong enough to protect against a particular class of attacks. This is a screenshot from a mailing list where we told them, hey, you can do this. You can hack into every single package that you're cloning by doing this. And they were very surprised. They just didn't even consider that this was a possible thing to do on the software supply chain. Once we have an understanding of these threats, then we can build systems. We can build software systems and develop practices that can enforce better security expectations about the practices in the software supply chain. The idea is to go from the left-hand side to the right-hand side. The things that we do in my lab are generally large systems that have high impact. You may recognize the Sigstore or Intoto logos there. There's other systems that are also brewing that come part of this solution. And I'm going to try to tie everything together into sort of left to right-hand side, from understanding and visualizing to preventing and enforcing security expectations. Intoto is a very high impact project that we use for software transparency. It's now part of the CNCF incubator. It's actually the system that was integrated by SolarWinds to prevent further compromises like the one that they were subjected to. And it has quite widespread adoption between multiple adopters. Sigstore is another very popular tool that is being used to sign software. You can think of it as the Let's Encrypt of software signing. I am very happy to see that it has a very widespread adoption between different types of vendors. I'm even more humbled to hear that this year GitHub Actions is using Sigstore to sign for Intoto provenance for NPM packages that are published from NPM. This starts connecting and giving us stronger assurance about the processes of how software is made. Thinking back to the Tylenol bottle, this is the first tamper-proof seal that we can add to prevent things from being modified in transit between the source code, the supplier, and the distributor, the pharmacy. Now, I believe that after this changes, we're starting to shift in the fundamental challenges of software supply chain security from how do we even know or enforce security mechanisms to how do we even evaluate that the security mechanisms are the proper ones, or how do we even assess whether a Tylenol bottle that we just got has the right label. And this is what I call the SBOM question. SBOMs are food labeling expectations that are set by the government to provide transparency about what's on the bottle. And we should be able to assess, in the same way that we assess anything that we consume in the physical world, whether the things on that label are good for us. Now, we have a problem with this story, and I'll talk about two essentially seemingly disjointed consequences of this as research that's ongoing. The first one is SBOMs are really good, but we don't understand what the role of an SBOM is. If you go to the definition from different organizations that are defining and requiring SBOM standards, they will all tell you that it's essentially a food label. They say, well, there's an inventory and there's a list of ingredients, but some others say there needs to be licensing in it. Some of them say that it's just a complete inventory of first-party and third-party components. Some others disagree about the third-party component element to it. So these SBOMs, these food labels that we don't understand what they're doing, they're not widespread. We don't understand when we see one, whether it is correct. And we don't even have the mechanisms to understand whether it's actually telling us the truth. They also serve different purposes. For example, this is a recommendation, I think, from CISA that talks about the different types of SBOMs and what they are able to tell you. I believe that a food label shouldn't be telling you different stories depending on when did you make the food label, but rather it should be a correct assessment of what's on the product. This is not the SBOM's fault, I claim, because I believe that we don't have the processes that allow us to make proper SBOMs. There's many salient points around this, that many systems that I'm developing, but I'll be talking about two that I'm excited, and I think they're the furthest along. The first one is dark files, and the second one is WAC. Dark files, the background is SBOMs are great. Everybody agrees that we need an SBOM. The problem is that producing an SBOM is not easy. If you go to talk to industry people, they will say, well, how do I make an SBOM? I have a container. I'm going to deploy to the cloud. I use a tool like Trivy. And then I tell Trivy, hey, what's the SBOM that should correspond to this particular container? And Trivy will take a magnifying glass. It will look at your container, and it will give you an SPDX document, an SBOM. Now, The way that they do it is actually they start looking at files, package metadata, image manifests, essentially things that are associated with the container. They try to decompose it. They use software composition analysis, and then they determine, well, this is the SBOM. We defined a very, very small, simple experiment, which was, if I look at the SBOM and then I compare it to the files in the system, do they agree? And unfortunately, they don't. A lot of SBOM tools, in fact, all of them, they will underreport or overreport or even give you conflicting information about what's on the file system itself or the container image in this case. We built a tool called dark files and a tool called diffbom that computes the differential between the files on a container and the claims of an SBOM, and we try to reason what are the disagreements. We run this over very, very popular Docker Hub images. I think it was the top 1%. And we found that this is a prevalent problem and that this has consequences on the behavior of a container. For example, the SBOM may claim that some file belongs to a package, but it's actually a file that has been modified to change the behavior of the container. Or the SBOM may claim that a binary exists and the binary doesn't really exist. Or even more concerning, that a binary does not exist a binary is not present. But when you look into the container, a binary is present and it's executable and it has permissions from root or a sticky bit or something like that could cause great damage to a system. So we call this phenomena, we call it dark files. We are inspiring ourselves from dark matter. But this is essentially things that are there, but we can't really see them. And they have a big impact on the behavior of our container. Now, as I was saying, we cannot see them, they can hurt us. We cannot see them, but we cannot talk about them, so we get bad SBOMs. And we cannot see them, so we cannot do anything about them. We don't have mechanisms to prevent these dark files from harming or getting us into legal trouble and so on and so forth. The goal of dark files then is for us to provide a testable mechanism to measure this SBOM discrepancies in the same way that we measure software quality by using, say, cyclomatic complexity, or we measure code coverage in a testing suite. We should be able to run tools in our SBOMs that can tell us measurable insights about the quality of itself. I'm going to talk about another project called wreak, and we're going to start from the same premise. SBOMs are great. The problem is SBOMs and generally other information is conflicting. As we were just looking at dark files, can't disagree. So we need mechanisms to reason about this conflicting information. We need to find the disagreements and then be able to reconcile them or just bring them to light. What we're doing in this case is we're actually trying to index all of the information about open source software in general that we can in a high performance graph database. We call this wreak. It's a companion for Salsa, the graph for understanding artifact composition. And the basic idea is we crawl all of the software supply chain. Sigstore, for example, is useful here because we have a transparency log that contains 20+ million signatures and meta information about software products. Then we built a graph. We associate it all. And then using a taxonomy that we developed, we're able to reason and ask ourselves, do these two different claims about a software, say two different SBOMs, claim the same things? Do they agree with each other? Is this provenance statement from Salsa in agreement with what supposedly the SBOM says that, about its provenance? Are these two different artifacts actually the same, and do they have the same vulnerabilities associated with them? And so on and so forth. wreak is now a framework that you can build and you can deploy it, and it can consume software information as it's being produced from different data sources. Sigstore being one of them, but you can use GitHub repositories, vulnerability feeds. Now, I posit that we need to be a little bit closer to what other disciplines in the computing field are doing when they are, for example, monitoring fake news. This is a very interconnected network of different actors that have different motivations, and they are making different claims about software. Maybe we can reason in the same way that we reason about fake news on Twitter. What is it that these claims are having, are being made, and what is the consequence that they have on the security of a software product? We can also use wreak, for example, identify ecosystem level interventions that allow us to minimize the vulnerable surface of a software product. I recall the left pad incident when somebody just pulled in what's essentially a very critical node in this supply chain network and caused a lot of damage, not in the usual backdooring case, but in the nobody was able to build their software anymore. So we take this, we build these networks, we identify central nodes, and then we're able to identify good targets of attack and good places to put our efforts at an ecosystem level to prevent things from like left path from happening, or just prevent hackers from finding a very sort of juicy high blast radius point of attack. The other nice consequence of this is that you can actually measure how are people, and this goes back to what Laurie was talking about, how are people developing their software? What are the most popular versions of OpenSSL that are being used out there? So what is the most impactful CVE that we should be concerned about? How fast are people updating between open source versions and their deployments? And it's actually, it's very illuminating when you actually see this in the wild, and you also see how different vendors manage these vulnerabilities and how they could improve by having better communications and coordination. To close, you can then use a tool that uses WAC to reason and better develop your software by just using concentrated policy checking from the sort of this graph database. The intuition is, well, an SBOMs and software metadata can be reasoned as a graph, and I think Ashish will talk better about this with this project. And then you can also generate SBOMs by thinking about them as a graph optimization problem. What are the best dependencies that I can use? What are the constraints that I have in my software? And what, as a consequence, what is the best sort of like dependency choice and dependency license, or whatever sort of restrictions I have for my software. This also allows you to, for example, create guess bombs, as we call them, a guess of an SBOM for a software product that you don't know, but you know that it has certain software components. Now, so we did all of this. We go from in toto that allows you to collect software supply chain information, essentially provide tamper-proof seals to title all bottles. Then you put them on a ledger that allows people to know what's been done, when, and by who. Then you index and associate all of this information to build this knowledge graph that has information about the whole software ecosystem, ideally, once we're done with this. And then you can use this to build better software, to integrate these insights in the way that you produce software. The takeaways, SBOMs will become prevalent, so we need better tools to reason about the quality that they have. And we need to fill in the gaps where SBOMs are not available, so that we can actually think of SBOMs in the ecosystem in the same way that we think about food labeling. This is it. I wanted to use the last minute that I have in my talk to talk about SCORED. It's a software supply chain workshop that we put out in CCS. It's going to happen on November 20. It's a perfect forum to talk between researchers and industry people and discuss what are the pressing issues from both sides. Sometimes I feel that researchers have a very good insight on what are the interesting solutions, but they don't have a very good insight of what are the current problems, and vice versa. So I think it's great to talk about these things, especially for an issue as pressing as software supply chain security. And with this, I open the floor for questions.
Thank you so much, it's a great honor to have you. This is exciting talk from Santiago. And so let's see if there are any questions. While we wait for that, I have a couple of questions which are very relevant to the graph bomb work that we're doing at Cisco Research, as you pointed out, and thank you for that. And also that about the you showed a chart on a table on OpenSSL and different kind of software packages and the different other devices or systems that are using them. Now, I guess it will not just be a two-dimensional table, it will be multi-dimensional table if you really unroll them, right? Santiago?
So when you said multi-level, as in there are deeper dependencies here, right?
Yeah, because there are interdependencies between these dependencies, and there could be
right. So For example, something that's not like obvious in the picture is sometimes you have multiple TLS stacks inside of the same device, depending on which application is running. So you may have a smart TV that's using, say, I don't know, Spotify, but it's also using Netflix, and some of these come bundled with their own TLS stack. It is very hard to discover those, but it's also useful when you find that those two exist, because then you have a better idea of what's the underlying provider for those libraries. For example, if you have two different versions of OpenSSL, you can better guess what is the version of glibc that's underneath, if this makes sense.
Absolutely. This is quite helpful, and this visualization would help us also to understand that you mentioned about behavioral analysis. If when SSBOMs are not there, can you please shed more light on what you mean by behavioral analysis and how you want to carry them out?
Yes. So when you build this graph, you can also attach information about the behavior of or like testable behavior of a library. So what we did for this TLS work is we actually rebuilt all versions of OpenSSL. And then we tested how do they do their TLS handshake in terms of, say, broadcasted algorithms, the ones that they proposed. And also, for example, the extensions and the ordering of the extensions to essentially give us a fingerprint. This way, then we can associate the way that a library behaves with the library in the context of the software supply chain. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. All right. And so at Cisco Research, while we are working with and collaborating with academic researchers like Santiago, Brandon, Laurie, and Professor Elisa Bertino from different universities, we are also engaged in internal research projects that are relevant to software supply chain security. In fact, we are building a holistic software supply chain security platform, or if I can call that a holistic cyber physical supply chain security platform called GraphBomb. And can call it a graph bill of materials because it could be software, hardware, essentially cyber physical, therefore, and just calling it a GraphBomb. Now, the challenge that we see in this example is that, and we have seen in the last couple of 1.5 hours or so, is that there are several attacks that have been carried out, starting with SolarWinds hack to minor attacks that where malicious entities, threat groups are compromising existing software supply chain for carrying out, for stealing data, for pawning the systems and controlling them and encoding them as botnet network and whatnot. Maybe for ransomware, etc. Right? So I'm going to skip this one. Essentially, this one talks about how since 2020 the supply chain security threats and attacks have increased. This is a bit dated, but it brings home the point that we are at the cusp of how we want to address our software development lifecycle, as well as our supply chain measures in a security aware manner. So to that end, the different government entities have taken this note that how the proliferation of attacks are being carried out because of the different packages, different dependencies are vulnerable. There are niche guidance, there is different reports and best practices that are being offered. CISA best practices are there. White House in the United States have an executive order on that, as well as UK has its own cyber assessment framework, and I have not been able to mention all of them. In fact, Some of our speakers in this summit have pointed to them very closely. They are working with some organizations as well, government parties. Now, the question, let's step back and try to understand how do you trust a software artifact, okay? A software artifact has several components. It has licenses, policies, and how to use them, how not to use them. It is identity information and relations of stakeholders, like which group developed it, which group is maintaining it, and there's a provenance around that. There are stakeholders, there are users of these packages, software artifact. What are the packages that are developed out of this software artifact? What packages it depends upon? So there's a dependency graph. So there are different aspects of a software artifact that we need to analyze properly and address their trustworthiness in order to trust that software artifact. Right now, I'm not going to talk about hardware, software, cyber, physical artifact because that essentially is an extrapolation of this this chart here. Now, if a given package depends on several other packages, there are static time dependencies, there are dynamic time dependencies, and there are dependencies which are kind of available, whose open source is whose source code is available, and there are dependencies whose source code is not available. The binaries are available, and there are dependencies whose which are not known. You know, it's like they are kind of hidden, or they are protected dependencies, depending on the type of the artifact. Right now, the question that we're asking in this research project within Cisco Research and is influencing our our SBOM initiatives and our software supply chain work is that is the dependency tree, is the dependency a tree or a graph? Is it, when we call it a graph, of course a tree is a graph. What I'm talking about is it a generalized graph? Like it may be a tree, a DAG, or it could be a cyclic graph. Okay. Then the question comes: are there circular dependencies possible in a software artifacts? Of course, yes. Your complex systems have circular dependencies due to callback functions. So dependency graphs can have cycles. There could be cycles due to the way it is used. A given package is used, they're called or whatever. And therefore, we didn't find that kind of modeling with general graphs for software bill of materials or dependencies in the industry. Most of the technologies and systems, libraries that are out there, like Gitbum or Omniboard, CNSF or Salsa, all of them focus either as a tree or a DAG. We wanted to generalize that, and we want to build a holistic platform that is where we want to look at all aspects of these dependencies. That's why we developed this called GraphBomb. This work is GraphBomb is going to be open sourced very soon. We're in the process within Cisco and in the process of getting all the approvals, and within some time we'll look out for the announcement and an open source project there on GraphBomb. Now, dependency tree, if you look at, it looks like this one. For example, this is from Gitbum, which is called Omniboard today. And then there are the supply chain integrity threads from Salsa points them out, right? It's like there are in the life cycle, there are source, you build them, you create a package, there are dependencies that come in, and therefore there are challenges about source code integrity, there are build level integrity issue challenges, and how do you ensure those aspects, right? In fact, some of the attacks that we have seen are at the time of build level integrity, which is also right, and that where the industry and the academic world is aware of. Now, what is also happening is that the granularity at which we are looking at these dependency graphs, these SBOMs. The SBOMs today look at files as they are atomic units. However, if we look at a dynamic level of dependencies and at the level of functions, okay, there are this is a work we did and it is. It appeared a couple of years back on function-based attacks. How if a malicious function from an untrusted software dependency software package is carrying out an attack on a trusted function by walking up the function stack, walking up the stack, and then trying to find any sensitive information there. So this is a new concept of function-based attack that we introduced in that work, and which also challenges the current state of trustworthiness of software supply chain. So what it means is that we cannot really, our SBOMs cannot really focus on only libraries. We need to go to the level of the atomic units of SBOMs or supply chain security analysis, software supply chain security analysis should focus on more fine granular units of computation, such as functions. Now, what are the different metrics that are there for software supply chain security? The metrics are, of course, number of vulnerabilities, the metrics around vulnerabilities from different dependent packages, the confidentiality of those packages, confidentiality of the data, as we have discussed that and have been presented by our speakers in the summit, the secret sensitive data code, the integrity of the code, the packages, availability, and that's so many of them. Right? Now, the current, as you mentioned, the current practices have several gaps, and the dependency trees are not sufficient. We need to have generalized signatures. And when we once we bring in generalized signatures, then the question is, how do you support them? Do you current hashing techniques or digital signatures which are used for integrity of those packages and the supply chain graph, will that be can be supported? Are there advanced cryptography techniques for graphs? And yes, we have. I have worked on those techniques earlier, and there are other researchers in the academic community, industry research community who have worked on them, and we can bring them in there. Package level dependency is coarse grained. We need fine granular level dependencies like function level. Not all security metrics are being evaluated. We need comprehensive security analysis for holistic supply chain, software supply chain security. And the next point is supply chain is not a centralized process. A supply chain security analysis has to be decentralized, and because of the nature of it, because there are different decentralized stakeholders who own the packages, who manage them, who use them, who are accountable to them. Therefore, software supply chain security is more decentralized in nature. I'm going to skip them. I'm going to show an example. This is a screenshot from Grabber platform where we show that for a specific package on a system on public GitHub, there are these the kind of cyclic dependencies that are there right here. So let me quickly move on to the novelties of GraphBomb. That we know already. We support fine granular bill of materials, support generalized software. We also have built-in Web3 and smart contracts for decentralized supply chain governance. Now, one of the key challenges is accountability. Like once you determine a vulnerable package, right? Who is accountable for those vulnerable packages, right? It cannot be the user of those packages. Perhaps it is, depending on the license agreement, terms of use, right? There also has to be accountability in terms of remediation. Who is going to remediate those vulnerabilities, right? I'm going to skip that quickly. And then we also developed the concepts of API bomb, like how API bill of materials look like, function bombs, as we talked, and cryptography bombs. Especially cryptography libraries are used everywhere, widely used. They are kind of building blocks of software supply chain, even hardware software supply chain. Right? Therefore, building a cryptography bomb is essential, and Graph bomb also looks at that. Graph bomb also supports binary analysis and trying to determine how binary packages, their supply chain can be determined. They are and that can be supported in the platform. And we support decentralized software supply chain security aspects. So therefore, we think that GraphBomb, our goal is to make GraphBomb as a holistic platform for cyber physical supply chain support, especially software supply chain security support. So these are essentially, if you look at this is a dashboard screenshot of GraphBomb. We have going to skip this one. I'm going to give a demo right now. Let me see if I can bring up the demo. Stop this screen sharing. Yeah, you see, I have only. I'm going to go over the demo fully, but because it's about 6 minutes. We have only 3 to 4 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes remaining. So I'm going to run the demo here. Let's see. So the demo essentially is about GraphBomb platform, which are essentially we're calling the decentralized and graph-based software supply chain security platform, which has evolved now to become decentralized and graph-based cyber physical supply chain security platform. So it takes a GitHub URL for the demo, and what it does is it only goes to a certain level. It took this URL for boundless repository, and it goes only to first or second level of dependencies, because if we start taking all the levels of dependencies, as we saw in Santiago's presentation, right, it really explodes. The number of edges are in hundreds of thousands or in millions. You know? So we just, for the purpose of the demo, we don't want to cannot go through that. So in this case, in the supply chain graph that we are building, is a number of nodes are 44, edges 43, dependencies are 20. But if we increase the number of levels, it's going to go into more detail. And then we're computing a supply chain graph hash. This graph hash is based on the graph hashing technique that we have in our IEEE TKD paper with Professor Elisa Bertino and myself and other researchers. That graph hashing library is actually developed as part of GraphBomb. As we mentioned, GraphBomb is going to open source. That library also will be open source as part of that process. It's a research prototype. I just want to mention that it's tested to some extent, but it's not rigorously tested for any use, any product level use right now. And then we enable a decentralized capability here. We have integrated this with an Ethereum based chain, and also we have a capability to also integrate that with Hyperledger. We have different. We can the owner or stakeholder of boundless repository here or the other repositories can actually upload this digital signature for this package. They can sign it using a tool that we provide, and the user of this can actually request for signature verification as well for the tool. Let me move quickly. The supply chain security graph for boundless. Let me quickly move on. We also show, okay, there's an SBOM here we have the SPDX based SBOM we can download, so we compute that, make it available, and we look at the different kinds of vulnerabilities that are there for each packages in the dependency graph. I'm going to the platform offers moving across the vulnerabilities, CVEs, etc. And then we also look at the history. This is a history of with the smart contract that is developed, that is used for supply chain governance on the Web3 platform. Right? These are history of transactions there. Now, one of the key aspects that I want to bring out here is one metric we have developed on the vulnerability the vulnerability and risks associated with this specific repository, and how each dependency and the dependency graph are contributing to the overall risk. Okay, in this case, if you take a simple measure, right, what is the percentage of vulnerability for each dependency package in that system, right? And we have a separate project that called Graphene that actually takes attack graphs and develops a more comprehensive concept of risks and exploitability scores, as well as how to remediate them. So so there's a close overlap there that can be used here for risk analysis. But let me pause here. I think I'm over time with respect to the time. Let me see if there are any questions. But in fact, we can move on to, if there are no questions, we can move on directly to the panel. But I think there is a comment on the chart on my slides that team should also only accept software packages which are digitally signed by the owner and can be verified upon receipt and loading the software package. Absolutely. I think that is a great point, and that is where we are moving towards, that software packages that are digitally signed by the owner or a stakeholder. Sometimes the owner may not sign, may have outsourced them, or maybe have authorized some other entity to sign them, and can be verified upon the receipt and loading into the software. Absolutely, that's correct. But there is a challenge there that not all packages, especially dynamically loadable packages, cannot be enforced. And how do you do that? But anyway, let us move to the panel session. We have only 15 minutes remaining. Okay, there's another question is, can you please share some links for more information about GraphBomb, maybe in the repo itself and roadmap? Yes, absolutely. We will take care of that. If this is an internal, currently this summit is internally broadcast. So therefore, these questions are coming from within Cisco. So we will take care of that. So let me start with one question that we have from the audience earlier after Laurie's talk. For Laurie, is that where can we see the raw data about this research related to the 70 companies you mentioned? What exactly interests them? What are their concerns, etc. Also, do the highlight slides you showed come from these companies? So Laurie, if you can address this question.
So these were their 7 challenges. And this is kind of an overview of the 7 challenges. I'll put the link in the slides. And are you distributing the slides? Is that what you're saying? If you distribute the slides, I can put the link on this to the archive, the page that has all 3 archive links on it. And because there was variation between the summits, I was just summarizing overall. But this is what they, the people in the summits voted on the topics that we were going to talk about. And this is the overview of the most common topics over time.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Laurie. Now I have another question that came in for all the speakers. Please feel free to chime in. will you comment on the use of NLP techniques for malware detection and analysis? And especially if I can extend that to use of large language models like ChatGPT for malware detection and analysis. Can I request speakers, please feel free to unmute yourself and speak if you like.
Perhaps I can start. For sure,
Thank you.
this is a very interesting question. One, in theory, if you look at the large language models, I would like to say that, for example, I have seen some examples in which ChatGPT can detect errors in the code, okay? Not, let's say, vulnerabilities. So I have seen example in which I could look at this code and finding not only these errors, can debug, provide the correct solution. And in some, but however, a lot depends on the prompt, okay, that you give. So because depending on the prompt, you can get a different result. So in general, again, a project like a Copilot can identify the vulnerabilities. Probably that could be extended to detect the presence of malicious software. A large language model, for example, could generate a lot of variations in malware, because in general, as probably Brendan knows, sometimes malware is generated from variations from previous malware, okay? So that one could proactively even generate a lot of different variations, and therefore you could, know what you can expect. Because in general, there is also a very important problem there. We looked at this robustness. In general, attackers can generate variations, but if they change the functional characteristic of the malware will not work, won't do the attack, basically. So there is interesting work. Whether for doing this you need a large language model, I'm not completely sure, okay? It could be that something like ChatGPT may be able to do this. One would need to do experiments, but that is an exciting area to do research. Thank you for suggesting it.
Thank you.
I'll follow up since I was invoked in that answer. So this is actually something that I have some data on, because I teach a malware reverse engineering class every semester here at Georgia Tech. And for the last 4 or 5 offerings, the first day is full of students who say, can we get ChatGPT's help reverse engineering the malware for the assignments? And I say, sure, yeah, go ahead, please, use whatever tool can help you combat malware the best. And the students who use it get the worst grade on the first assignment, and then they know not to do that again. And that's for a few reasons. Let me explain. So number one, machine learning in general, large language models, being in that class, are very good at identifying common patterns, right? That's why they're really good at identifying like bugs in code. But malware, understanding what malware does is all about very intricate, tiny details, outliers, right? It's always about outlier analysis. And so this is kind of a weakness, actually, of a lot of these systems. So you can use it to help you. If there's a common pattern somewhere, it will absolutely be able to help you with that. But if it's a new sort of outlier, devil in the details kind of malware, then yeah, it's gonna get tripped up by it, because it's not as good as a human at identifying these sorts of really low level, outlier types of code.
Thank you, Brendan.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my group hasn't, since we don't look specifically at malware, and I don't have as much to say about that, but we are starting to look at use of LLMs for sorting through true and false positives from tools, for looking at vulnerabilities, to understand better what was going on, to identify malicious components, which maybe you call that malware. But I mean, I'll agree with Brendan that like everything, every case of the use of generative AI, it's not that great yet. So like, there's a lot of opportunity there, but also have to proceed with caution with everything so far.
If I can interject a comment, I think given the amount of interest and the resources, progresses are made very rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
So I would worry quite a lot. Actually, I'm already worried. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think. Thanks, Laurie, and thanks, Elisa, for the comments. LLMs are being used for also malware generation or attack code generation today, but malware analysis remains a difficult subject, definitely.
Yeah.
Any comments, Santiago? Would you like to? I don't want to put you on the spot, but
No, I think a lot of ground was covered. Something that I will say is I do believe that there's like LLMs and ChatGPT, and in a sense, a lot of the sort of commercial AI solutions are very good as somewhat of a party trick. You can like write an essay or a song that follows a certain artist. But when you look into the depth of what it's really doing, then it's so general purpose that for a task that's really very, very niche, which is malware analysis, then of course it's going to underperform. I think the question there is, can there be an LLM or any sort of like tool within the space that can be tailored for this task? And I assume that yes, there's something like that. I know some malware analysts that do copy like a decompiled code and say like explain what this like funny loop does, and that is useful. But I think that sort of like this human in the loop approach is what we're going to be seeing. But I think LLMs in general are also a little bit like Stack Overflow, that if you don't understand what the task at hand is, and you just copy paste code and let it do everything for you without a lot of critical thinking, then they usually don't give you the desired result. If you know how to read what's answering for you, and you know what to ask it, and you know how to tell when it's really lying to you or confusing you more than helping you, then you will have a really hard time. If you know those things, then it's really useful as a sort of a thing to lean on.
But Santiago, I want to mention though, that actually I see a lot of people that I know, but a lot of research exactly looking at the prompt, okay? So in my view, we should even teach a certain point the students, given that they will use these tools to generate pieces of the code. I don't say we generate an entire, let's say, implementation of a cellular network protocol. But they can generate code also because in the cellular network protocol, there is the idea of having reference implementation. Those are skeleton with interfaces, prototypes, and then there you can have the AI generating the pieces of code implementing certain interfaces. Okay, and in my view, people will learn how to use the prompt, and I think we should even teach them how to use them, since they're going to use them as well, use them well, to be honest. For example, I plan to see if given an SQL query in natural language, they can use a ChatGPT and obtain the SQL code. Okay, so I wouldn't say that those people will know very quickly how to properly use. Okay, that's my view.
I completely agree, and that was my notch on like the Stack Overflow mention, because I do, for example, teach a little module on how to actually use Stack Overflow correctly.
Exactly.
And it really is a useful tool, but it's one that can lead a lot of people down the wrong path if they don't know how to read it, how to use it. I think we should, as researchers, be also teaching our students how to make the most out of
exactly. Yeah.
technologies.
So
this great conversation. Sorry, I think we have another question that's come in for about 3 minutes remaining. So let's see. So some question is, this question is within Cisco, are you aware as bomb repo work taking place under within Cisco? Yes, and yeah, my response to that, yes, we can chart that offline. And thank you for the question. There's another question for Brandon. Your presentation shared information about a suite of tools and research efforts that address different threat vectors. This seems to highlight the daunting effort involved. Is there hope to level up to the potential attacks since the landscape changes continually? Maybe this is not really a question, just a lament.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be aspirational. There's definitely hope with a lot more research. Yeah, I mean, I like the way Santiago put it with this, if you buy Tylenol, right, there's all of these regulations and procedures that clearly define the tests and documentation that need to be done at each step. And software, maybe because we're too young of a community, I'm not sure why, but we don't have anything like that. And we're slowly moving there, right? It's thanks to summits like this that make it happen. So I'm optimistic. There's a lot of work. There's a lot of work to be done.
If I can interrupt for just 1 second and share my
Sure.
screen so that I can give the link that people wanted. It's a very simple link at the bottom, s3c2.org/software industry. And that on that page are so we have 3 documented, we had 6 summits, but 3 documented because we have a center since then. And so you can read about each of the 3 summits. So I'll leave that up for a second.
Thank you so much, Laurie, for actually organizing these summits across academia and industry. And we have been, thank you for inviting Cisco to that. I really appreciate that. They're very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, well, your contributions are really helpful to the conversation. So I appreciate your participation.
Thank you. So we have just 1 more minute remaining before the summit ends. I think I must thank all the speakers. At the same time, I'd like to request 1 line from each of our honorable speakers to spend time on software supply chain security. 1 line each.
So I guess my 1 line is we have to all work together. The industry has to work together on this problem. And Cisco's participation is essential.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I can say also my line, this is a complex problem. We needed to combine a lot of different techniques, and certainly may require different actors, companies, regulators, universities.
Thank you, Professor Bertino.
Should I go? Sorry,
Yes,
I
please.
don't know what the order was. My line is, this is a very, very exciting field to be working in. I think it includes a lot of high-profile attacks that keep you waking up in the morning, and it also has multiple disciplines involved that go from the social to the technical. So yeah, I encourage everybody to look at this problem. We need all hands on deck, and I'm very excited to be working here. Thanks for Cisco for the support. I think it really does enable innovation that's much needed. I think it was 2 lines, sorry.
Thank you. Brandon?
Yeah, I'll use my line to second my honorable colleagues. They covered so much in what they said. It was fantastic. I will say thank you to Cisco for putting this on. This was a great time. Fantastic to hear about everyone else's research, and please keep supporting developments in this area. That's my line.
Thank you so much, Brandon. And at the end, I must thank all the emerging speakers. They're world-renowned researchers and faculty members who have. We are honored to collaborate with you from Cisco and Cisco Research for your time for this summit and your thoughts. They're very helpful and for the industry and academic research and community. Thank you so much, Professor Bertino, for your time. Laurie, Santiago, and Brendan. I personally learned a lot and would love to continue to collaborate with you as we go forward. And I must thank our Cisco leadership, Ramana, our director, Vijay, our SVP, and also for Carla, for putting this all together. She puts in a lot of effort with Kim and others on Cisco TV as well. So thank you so much. I hope to see you all in the next summit and continue to collaborate.